talking about satire and laughing, especially after the 2024 presidential race. All of that and more is coming up. Stick with us.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. I'm Goins-Phillips, joined by our CBN News co-host here today, Billy Hallowell. Billy, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to have you here with us, and great also to have Joel Berry of the Babylon Bee here with us today. Joel, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Yeah, we are good, and it's great to have you with us to join Faith versus Culture today. So I want to get right into it and ask, you have a brand new book that you and the Babylon Bee have just put out called The Babylon Bee Guide to the Apocalypse, which it's 2024. The election just happened. I think it's probably a pretty timely book. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this now.
Yeah, well, we're just shameless grifters at the Babylon Bee, So we figured the election's coming up. Everyone is going to be scared and terrified and angry, and at least no matter who wins, half of the country is going to think it's the end of the world. So there will definitely be a market for the apocalypse book. So why don't we capitalize off of that and make some money? No, we wanted to make everyone laugh. We figured everyone has these anxieties about what they fear most, and we figured now would be a good time to laugh at it. So perfect timing, I think.
Yeah, you tackle a number of topics, obviously, in the book, and you go into a number of different areas. What was the most fun part of this book for you to write?
This book, honestly, this book is really stupid. We've written 4 of these guidebooks. So we started with the Guide to Wokeness, and the Guide to Wokeness was a little more, it was a little more scholarly as far as the Bee's standards goes. We had a lot more words in it. The Apocalypse, with each book we've gotten we went with fewer words and more ridiculous pictures, diagrams, comics, choose your own adventures, stories, activities, things that you can cut out. I mean, it's become more childish as we've gone along, but I think the most fun of it, I think, for me, was working with our team of artists. Kyle and I would kind of write what we wanted to see and kind of describe it to the illustrators. And sometimes you describe it well, sometimes you kind of don't, and you leave it to interpretation. And it's always wild to see what the illustrators come up with. But, in this book, we kind of tackled all of these different scenarios, ranging from, how to survive the rapture, how to survive a communist takeover, to things that the left is afraid of. So how to survive climate change, how to survive a takeover by evil MAGA insurrectionists. And each one has, fight moves that you can use, things that you need to make sure that you're hoarding in your bunker. We have a nice diagram on how to build your bunker. Very authoritative. We consider ourselves experts, having watched a lot of zombie movies. So we figure that we're good people to inform the public on this subject.
Well, I mean, there probably is nothing better than watching The Walking Dead as a tutorial of how to prepare for the end of the world, which I feel like I'm probably dating myself at this point to say The Walking Dead, because probably a lot of people don't know what that is.
Hasn't that show been on for like 30 years now?
Right. Yeah. But I do want to ask you kind of an overarching question about comedy, because, you said half the country is going to be thrilled, half the country is going to be despondent over an election, result, regardless of what the outcome is. But comedy is something that generally kind of brings people together, right? Making fun of yourself, making fun of other political perspectives, of your own political perspective. I think those are good things. I think it's important to do those things, because laughing together is really important. But In 2024, it's like comedy is kind of, we don't really like that. Like if you look at the late night shows, I can't remember the last time a late night comedian really made me laugh. I don't think they see that as their job anymore. So talk a little bit about, as somebody who works in satire, why is it that comedy has become kind of anathema in our modern culture?
Oh man. Well, I mean, you mentioned late night comedy. This morning, I couldn't wait to check this out. I wanted to see how the late night comics reacted to the results of the election, and it didn't disappoint. It was just what I expected. I mean, it was dour, it was hopeless, it was angry, it was fearful. And that's what's happened to a lot of these guys. I always say that you can't write good comedy if you are A, afraid, and 2, angry. If you are angry and fearful, you are not going to be funny. And the advantage I think that Christians have, regardless of what happens in the election, even if Trump had lost, or the election had been disappointing for us as Christians in one way or another, we have this thing that the other side doesn't have. We have this eternal hope that we can place our faith in. We know which side wins in the end, and that's kind of a great place to be. We also know that we're sinners, and as sinners, we are often hypocritical, imperfect. We fail and mess up a lot, and that leaves us wide open to make fun of ourselves with joy and with good humor. It really is just what we need right now. We need to laugh because there's just so much heaviness out there, even from the comedians.
What do you think it is about the Babylon Bee, right? Because you guys have blown up in popularity. You mentioned, obviously, you've done 4 of these books now. You don't do books unless people are buying them and there's interest in them. So there's been popularity there, and you see it on social with your posts. What is it about the content that you think is resonating with people so much?
The thing that I always hear from people, this is the number one line whenever I go to an event, I speak, or I actually meet the fans in person, which is always a lovely experience because I do this in my little garage office. I don't get to actually see the people who are reading our material, but when I actually do get to meet them in person, the number one thing I hear is, "You guys keep me sane." Even some people who have substituted their normal news diet with the Babylon Bee. So we're like a source of news now, to where people will, if they want to know what's going on in the world, they'll go to the Babylon Bee first to get the lighthearted take on it before they kind of go to see what and I think that's lovely. I think it's wonderful to know that we are presented, we're not hiding from the facts of what's going on. We're kind of facing it head on. We're addressing what's out there, but we're doing it in a way that is lighthearted, that helps you to laugh at the absurdity of it, and always keeping in front of us that hope that we have. And so I'm glad that we can be that for people in a small way.
You mentioned that as Christians, we can laugh at ourselves, and it's important to laugh at ourselves because we recognize that we're fallen and just as broken and just as sinful as everybody else, right? There's nothing that sets us on our own apart from another person. The only thing that makes us different, of course, is trusting in the saving grace of Jesus Christ, which is a huge thing that sets us apart, but it's nothing we're doing on our own. So I say all that to say, when it comes to satire and comedy, I think people look at the Babylon Bee and they think, well, they have a conservative angle or they've got a Christian angle, and that's the perspective that they're coming from. But talk about why it is important for the Babylon Bee to poke fun at Donald Trump sometimes, or to poke fun at Republicans and to poke fun at Democrats, why it's good to be good-natured when you're making fun of kind of both sides rather than just targeting an enemy, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think it gives you some goodwill with your audience. If you go to see a stand-up routine, oftentimes the comedian will start by making fun of himself, his weight or his looks or what have you. And it kind of, it builds some goodwill and some trust, with the audience, knowing that you're willing to go anywhere. And before you kind of skirt the edgy material and kind of go into those more controversial segments, the audience already knows that you're willing to make fun of yourself. I think that's really important. And it's fun. I mean, because be honest, I mean, Christians are silly. Christian culture is really weird sometimes, and there's a lot to make fun of there. No point in leaving that low-hanging fruit on the ground. And, as far as Trump goes, what a funny person Trump is. I mean, there's so much to make fun of there, and do it in a way that doesn't come from a place of hate and despair is pretty rare nowadays. So, I think more comedians are coming around to it. At least I hope so. But for now, the B is kind of the ones doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, look, there's a lot to talk about, and we want to fit much more into this conversation with Joel Berry, but we're going to take a quick break. Everybody stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. We're here with Joel Berry from the Babylon Bee. Joel, I think something that's important to keep in mind is that as Christians, we keep this in mind here at CBN News, that we want to be informing people. We want people to know the latest information, the latest news that's going to impact their lives. But one, we want to do it from a gospel perspective. And two, we want to remember that our most important role as Christians is advancing the gospel, right? This is just a platform and an opportunity to start conversations that are important, that ultimately, though, can lead into gospel and eternal conversations. So as a Christian who's running a successful website like the Babylon Bee, who's writing these satirical books, it's great to make people laugh, and it's important to bring that levity into the world. But how do you wield kind of realizing that you've got this huge platform and you want ultimately for people to know about the saving grace of Jesus? That's the most important thing. So talk a little bit about that balance.
Yeah, that's not lost on me. I think about that often, the fact that we have this insane platform, and that someday I'm going to stand before God and give an account to how I used it, which is a terrifying thought, to be honest.
Every joke, Joel, every joke you're going to have to.
I will give an account for every idle joke that I told, right? I think in terms of just what we do and the humor and the jokes, we do try to slide it in there every once in a while. You don't want to be too heavy-handed with it. But I think that the overall impression that we give to people and that our work gives to people is that I think a lot of people have this image of Christians oftentimes as being severe or prideful or no fun, stick in the muds. And so I think that sometimes we can encourage people who are maybe on the outside looking in that, hey, the water's fine. You can actually explore this a little bit. The other thing that I hear sometimes from readers, we hear from atheists, sometimes leftists, sometimes that will admit to us that, hey, normally I hate everything that you guys do, but this joke was true, and it made me think a little bit. So I like that. I don't think that the Babylon Bee kind of is in this role to where we're taking someone through the conversion process beginning to end. We are one very small part of the body of Christ. If the entire body was like us, it would be insufferable, but we are playing our own tiny little role that I hope is important. And then, I hope that it the other thing too is that this platform and the influence that it has had has given us the ability to kind of have conversations with influential people. And our ownership, Seth Dillon and our editor-in-chief Kyle Mann have been able to have conversation with Elon Musk about Christ, not just in that famous podcast interview, but that's just something that a lot of people are thinking about right now. And the Babylon Bee has kind of been like their little gateway drug into looking into this more seriously.
All right, so people see the content, and I know a big challenge for you and other sites is when you're creating funny content, your headlines are so funny, and like people see it on social, they might not always click through, but when you do click through, you then see very entertaining stories. But people are meeting that content once it's published. Take us through the process. How many headlines do you create before you settle on one? What actually goes into the creation of this content? I'm sure it's a lot more than just whipping it out there and throwing it out.
Yeah, well, one thing I always tell my writers is don't be precious about your ideas, because ideas really are a dime a dozen. And we will go through hundreds and hundreds of ideas before we settle on the perfect headline and the perfect wording of the headline. So, I am in the morning, I'm kind of looking at all the news sites, seeing what the news cycle is doing, what we need to talk about, and kind of giving some marching orders to the writers. And then we just start pitching. And you might pitch 100 times before a headline is chosen. And then when a headline is chosen, we might retool the wording of that headline and just so that it hits just right. And so there is a kind of a selection process and then a refining process so that it hits. I mean, our comedy is a very specific kind of comedy that has to work as you're just reading it in your news feed. We don't have like the ability of like a vocal inflection that a stand-up comedian has, the pauses that they make. You kind of have to write the pause into the joke, and it has to hit when you're reading it. So there's a little bit of engineering there. I encourage people who want to write for the Bee. It's not enough to just have 4, 5, 6 ideas. Send us 50 of your best ideas, and we might pick one that is good, and you'll get better as you go.
Yeah. You mentioned Elon Musk, and I think something that a lot of people have been concerned about, and in part it's probably why Donald Trump, I'm not even talking about him winning re-election, but why Donald Trump has resonated with so many people is because on the left, at least this is the way that they're perceived by so many, is this effort to censor, to crack down on free speech, to say, well, you shouldn't be able to say this because it's misinformation or disinformation. The problem is that we failed to define terms. Often it ends up being that mis or disinformation is really just a synonym for speech that I don't like. So as somebody who's been kind of on the front lines of viral content, often poking fun at our political leaders, what do you make of that? Do you feel that there is legitimate concern about censorship in 2024, not even from the government necessarily, but from some of these social media platforms?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right that misinformation, disinformation has just become a euphemism for whatever the people in power don't like. And the solution to bad ideas and disinformation, actually, there is disinformation out there, but the answer is to have as open and as free of an environment as possible so that you can counter that bad information with good information. And so, we're seeing it from the government. We saw it with government colluding with what was, previously Twitter, to silence narratives that they didn't like. And so it is a danger, but I think we're in this place now, especially with the internet, with Elon Musk buying X, that it's kind of like the genie is out of the bottle now. There's no putting it back in. And, the Gutenberg press has been reinvented, and the world will never be the same. I mean, we're going to look back at this time in history like we do today, looking back at the Reformation and the advent of the printing press. So I think it's going to be a very tumultuous time, but a very exciting time, for free speech and just kind of like the advancement of civilization overall.
All right. So how often do you have a headline or a story that you go back and you say, maybe we went too far? How does that happen? And then and maybe it doesn't happen right away. Maybe it's like 3 weeks later or a month later where you're like, okay, maybe that one crossed the line. Or do you guys feel like you have a pretty good system set up to avoid that?
Yes. We Christians always need accountability. We have our accountability groups. Comedy writers and comedians have very twisted minds. You have to understand, whenever there's a tragedy, something horrible happens in the news, as it's just coming out and people are mourning, we're already thinking of the jokes, and so it's just a weird mind that we have as writers. And so you have to be careful when you're dealing with tragedy. It's always good to maybe give it a little time as you're evaluating whether you should publish something. It has to be worth it in the sense that it has to be really funny or it has to be saying something important. You don't just want to anger people or trigger people for its own sake. That's not good comedy. And so we're always we're measuring it against those two things. Is it worth it by being funny enough, and is it making an important point?
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we let you go, Joel, I want to ask for people who obviously, everybody knows where the Babylon Bee is, but for people who maybe want more content from you or want to order a copy of the book, where can they go?
Yeah, well, you can follow us on Twitter. You can subscribe to the Babylon Bee on Twitter to get a little bit of extra content, but we recommend subscribing on the site. You get a lot of extra content that way. You can get discount on our merch. You can see our new January 6th mockumentary that we made. You can see that movie as a subscriber. The book is going to be available November 11th, and you can pick it up on Amazon, and we highly recommend doing that soon because the world is going to end at any minute, and you want to get it before it's too late. So
Pre-rapture buys. That's what you want.
Yeah, that's
Pre-rapture
right.
buys.
Right. I was going to say, breaking news, you heard it here first, folks. So if you want your copy of the book before it's all over, go ahead and head over to Amazon. Joel Berry, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, stick with us. We'll be right back with more Faith versus Culture. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm here now with Billy Hallowell. Billy, I think the conversation about satire is so important because, look, people are going to watch this and they're either going to, agree with the perspective of the guys over at the Babylon Bee or they're not. But I thought it was insightful to hear and kind of encouraging to hear Joel say that they still have some people who, even though they know the perspectives of the Babylon Bee, every once in a while they'll reach out to them in their DMs or wherever and say, I actually thought this headline was kind of funny. I think that's kind of encouraging and gives me a little bit of hope about our culture because it does open the door, most importantly, like Joel was saying, to gospel conversations. And that's what all of this is about.
In fairness, too, I think being an equal opportunity offender to some degree, when everybody's offended at some point and then everybody's praising you at some point, some would see that as you're doing the right thing, right? You're doing the comedy well. And so, I loved his response, though, to whether or not they have those moments where they do cross the line, because I think it can easily happen and we might reflect back, even though it's a joke. And you don't want to self-censor yourself too much. They're a very unique animal. I don't think we've seen anything like the Babylon Bee in the Christian space, which I think is why they've been so successful, because they are legitimately funny in a place where we haven't seen that kind of comedy. So I agree with you, Trey. I think it's good, and comedy is good for the soul.
It was a good conversation and nice to have Joel with us after the election results came in for this week. But everybody stick with us. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's episode of Faith versus Culture. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. Thank you so much for being here. If you want more news from a Christian perspective, especially after such a crazy election cycle, head over to cbnnews.com. You can get all the news of the day from a Christian perspective. And of course, check out our Quick Start podcast. It goes out every weekday morning where we go through the news from a gospel perspective, which is an important thing in 2024. So again, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. Thanks for being here, and God bless you.